And Chief Walsh. Good evening. It is 7 p.m. I would like to call the Public Safety and General Government meeting to order on April 28th. We will start with roll call. Heidi Alterman, Nicole Ayers, Josh Goldstein, Dominique Johnson,
Here.
Tom Keegan,
Here.
and Diana Revolus. Hi. I know Josh is going to be joining us late, and I think Heidi is going to be joining us a little bit late as well. And unfortunately, council member, I don't know why I just switched to that. Nicole is not going to be here tonight. First item on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes of the March 24th meeting. Thank you. I have a motion from Councilmember Revolus. Does anybody have any corrections or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. Please say aye or raise your hand. Okay. All right, great. Any abstentions or anybody opposed? Great, that is unanimous. Thank you so much. Do we have anybody on for public participation that would like to comment or speak?
We have one. Richard, would you like to raise your hand to speak? No, he's not raising his hand.
No problem. I did invite the press this evening, so Richard may be part of the press. I'm not 100% sure, not seeing the full name. Well, we will close public participation, seeing as there are no participants right now. I just want to make note that at 7:02, Councilmember Heidi Alterman has joined the meeting for the minutes. For new business, we really don't have a lot of new business tonight. I did want to just bring up one point for this Saturday. It is National Prescription Drug Take Back Day on April 30th, and our very own police department has a receptacle for those all year round, all the time. So I just wanted to point that out to everybody who's listening, anybody who might be interested, but Saturday is the National Prescription Drug Take Back Day. So just wanted to let everybody know if in case you have any prescription drugs at home that you would like to dispose of. Moving on, we do not have any old business. We do not have any action items this evening that we are voting on, but we do have a discussion item. And before I move on to that, I just wanted to open it up to any of the other council members to see if there's any other items you just wanted to bring to our attention. Great. All right, easy enough. So we're going to move on to the discussion items. This evening, we have the chiefs from the fire department and the chiefs from the police department to give us an overview of the Evergreen efficiency study that we recently were presented with. And I thought it would be really helpful to have them come and discuss the public safety part of that efficiency study this evening and answer any questions that anybody might have around that. Talk about, pros and cons to that efficiency study, what we can do, what we might not be able to do, and why, and just sort of give us an overview of their plans moving forward in general, but then also in regards to the efficiency study. So I don't know who would like to start first. I know there's a presentation planned. Are we doing police or fire first?
We actually have the slides combined.
Perfect.
So
Even
what
better.
I'll do is I'll just do a share screen and then I'll let the chiefs kind of take the lead.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
And we do only have about 6 slides. So our thought was maybe we'll go through the PowerPoint and then open it up for discussion, question, answers, if that works for the group.
That sounds great. Thank you.
It's not letting me go. Okay.
Michelle, excuse me, I wasn't sure if you wanted, sorry, if you wanted to do an overview or if you just want to start into the slides. I don't mind starting if it's okay with everybody.
Yeah, like I said, I think for the most part, we did meet with Councilwoman McMeer and Councilman Keegan, I want to say maybe 2-3 weeks ago, just to have a smaller discussion about the chapter 6, which is the public safety piece. Just to give a little bit more perspective on the experience, and again, really wanted to make sure for transparency that, again, you all kind of knew the thoughts and the process that we went through. It was a little bit different because Evergreen had a subcontractor working on the public safety component, whereas my understanding is they did the other interviews themselves. So again, our experience may have been a little bit different. And the consultant really had more of a technology perspective that he came in with. So it was definitely interesting. But again, I'll kind of turn it over to the chiefs and let them go through as well.
What I was thinking is maybe we can just take it bullet by bullet, and I can just talk about the first bullet from the police perspective, and then let Chief Gatto talk about it from the fire perspective, and then we can go to bullet 2 and 3 and 4. So for bullet 1, we just had not all information presented in the report is accurate, and some corrections provided were not updated in the final draft. So speaking from the police, and I think fire will have a similar take, but speaking from the police, we met with the consultant and had various interviews. Number of people spoke to him. We got the draft of the report, and we had a long discussion with city staff and also the consultants on the draft recommendations. And we noticed that there were items in the report that were not accurate, didn't reflect exactly what we were doing now. And we pointed those out, and we expected that they would all be corrected in the final draft that came out. And some were, but many were not, which was kind of frustrating. And some were corrected or adjusted, but not all the information was presented. So it didn't give a full overview of the total picture for anyone just reading the report. And that's what we were concerned about, was the general public or people that don't have inside knowledge would look at the report and take it at face value and not really get a full understanding of what the recommendations were and the limitations that we're faced with if we try to implement them regarding union contracts and other things. So that was one of the first frustrations that we dealt with, is that the final report still included some information that wasn't completely accurate from the police point of view. And I'll turn it over to Chief Gatto or someone from the fire if they want to comment about that as well.
Thank you, Chief. I think Chief Gatto is having some issues. He got kicked off, so he's trying to reconnect. But I can agree. We had a similar experience when we read through the final report. A lot of the recommendations that were made for the fire department were items that we actually already had, in the process of upgrading. For example, our software and our information technologies, it was already in the process of being upgraded, and we're in that transition now. The same goes for our station notification system. We've been working with Combined Dispatch and with Lieutenant Blake on implementing the new software and the new technology for that. It had mentioned reducing vacancies, which before the study came out, we had already put 12 new firefighters on. We have another 8 in the academy now. So we'll have put on 20 firefighters on the last year, leaving us with just 2 vacancies. So that's really an item that was brought out in the study that's no longer an issue. And also another was reducing overtime. And a lot of the overtime in the fire department, really most of it, is contractual, where if we have to have 33 firefighters on duty at all time by contract. So if a firefighter takes a vacation day or someone is out sick, by contract, we have to hire to fill that position, which creates overtime. In addition to that, the numbers that the study used were primarily from 2020 and 2021, which were COVID years. So for example, when we look at our 2020 numbers, about 9% of our overtime that year was COVID related. About 10% of our overtime in 2021 was COVID related, either COVID, people that were out with COVID, or people that were on quarantine for COVID. So that overtime really, we hope, will not come back again. Those were specifically during the pandemic. So we just felt that a lot of the numbers that were put out there, were a little bit skewed for those reasons. And I think the slides will go into a little bit more detail with that when Michelle goes through them.
Thanks, Deputy Chief. I'll move on to bullet 2 and 3, which kind of piggybacks on what you started speaking about regarding the overtime issue. So, as the chief said, they were comparing overtime the last year and a half to 2 years based upon numbers that were skewed because of COVID. And we faced similar situations in the police department where at times we had a number of officers that were out with quarantine, with COVID, or were mandated to be quarantined by the health department because they were in contact, especially in the midst of the pandemic when it was not really fully known exactly what the quarantine rules should be, so to speak. They were changing rapidly. So we had a number of people that were out for 14 days or 10 days just for being in close contact, and those people had to be backfilled. So the overtime numbers were skewed. But another issue that wasn't brought out, which we pointed out in the after seeing the draft, some of the overtime is due to vacancies not being filled. And while that's a valid point, it didn't point out that there was also a surplus in the payroll account because of vacancies that aren't filled. So the overall budget is remaining flat, even though the overtime budget has increased. So there really wasn't a significant increase in the overtime budget over the last 2 to 3 years. Over the overall budget. The overtime budget has increased because of the fact that we're shorthanded in staff, but the payroll account is in the surplus far more than the overtime. As an example, for this current year, our overtime will be over our budgeted amount, but our payroll account will be far under our budgeted account. And when it all balances out, as it did last year, our budget came in under budget overall. And I expect that to happen again this year. And the report failed to show that the total picture. So calling for a 15% reduction in overtime per year over the next 5 years has no real basis. And I even asked the consultant, where does that 15% number come from? And they really had no explanation other than to say, well, you should really do that. So it was kind of, I really couldn't understand where they were getting their recommendation from. So it kind of piggybacks on what the fire department said. They were facing some of the same things with staffing and COVID. And I'm sure they faced the same thing with their payroll account being surplus, which would then offset those overtime increases. And in fact, like I said, last year, our overall budget came in under budget. We actually gave back money to the city that was not spent when all was said and done. And then the final bullet on here, they spent a lot of time, or I shouldn't say they, the subcontractor spent a lot of time talking about our CAD RMS, which is our dispatching and records management system. And we use NextGen, which we have for many years. It goes way back. We were one of the first in the state to use NextGen. NextGen was built back by a captain who became the chief in Brantford, the Brantford Police. He built it for the Brantford Police Department. Over the years, he improved it. He ended up selling it to a private company who then really took it and expanded it and then marketed it to the remainder of the state. And over the years, many, many state agencies have gone to the NextGen system. Currently, the vast majority of state departments in Connecticut use NextGen, as does the state police. And as a result of that, any legislative changes or mandated changes that the state computer system requires us to make are automatically done by NextGen, either at little cost or no cost, because the state police are mandated to do it and the contract calls for them to make those updates. So for us to change to an outside system, not only would it be very expensive, over $1 million to do, and then training all of our officers on a new system, and then the annual costs to do that. The additional cost would be these upgrades that are required as things change in the state. And just to highlight that, I spoke to one of the individuals who handles the state reporting for the racial profiling and the use of force reporting in the state, which is now done through the state of Connecticut, and they contract to, now it's UConn's Institute of Regional Manning and Politics or something like that, IMRP. It used to be done through Central Connecticut, but it moved to UConn. And I mentioned to him the consultant's recommendation to get away from NextGen and go to an outside vendor. And he kind of laughed and said, you don't want to do that. He even pointed out that there's several agencies in the state that don't use NextGen that are trying to go to NextGen because of the problems they're having with the outside vendors who don't make those Connecticut updates. They're not Connecticut specific agencies. NextGen only handles Connecticut and a couple small colleges in Massachusetts. So they're very Connecticut based. They're based here in Connecticut in North Haven. Actually, two of our former officers, a former deputy chief and a former patrol officer, now work for NextGen in various roles. So we have a very good lifeline to the company and a very good personal relationship when we have issues and things changing. They also noted that NextGen, the CAD RMS we're using, is not doing everything that it should do for us. And we admit that and we agree to that. But the problem with that is we need training and someone to be trained to do that. And we're trying to deal with that. But it's not something that the average officer can be trained to do or can be trained full time to do. So in fact, we're meeting with them shortly to see how we can go about making some of these changes to get reporting, et cetera. So again, that recommendation didn't fully tell the whole picture and didn't reflect our input back into that, so that anyone reading the report would understand the bigger picture of why NextGen is the preferred vendor for the city or for the police department at this time. And just one last thing, now that I think of it, the fire department does not use the CAD system, so to speak, that we use. However, their software integrates with NextGen, so our dispatchers are able to use NextGen to begin the reporting for the fire department, and then their software, their system, then piggybacks on NextGen with an interface. And I believe, and the chief can add to, I believe that they're looking to upgrade their side of it, as you know, for what they need as far as the fire aspect goes, because I don't believe NextGen does not have a fire module, so to speak. It's a fire software. I think it's called Firehouse that they're using now, but I'm not as familiar with the fire side.
Yeah, that's correct, Chief. We're using Firehouse, and we're in the process of now switching over to ESO, which is it's better software. It would allow us to do a lot more with the MDTs and the apparatus and with the station alerting. And we're in the process of inputting information into ESO right now from Firehouse. So that should be up and running in about a month. But yes, it will interface with NextGen the same way. So there shouldn't be any interruption there, and it should work as seamlessly.
You can probably move to the next slide. Thanks. So I'll kind of cover the next two together, at least from the police point of view. So they made a lot of recommendations for new positions in the police department to do different things. And for each recommendation, he basically said that we could absorb that new position within the current staffing levels of the department, which really is virtually impossible. But the recommendation that they made is some of those positions could be civilianized, where officers wouldn't have to, don't necessarily have to do that. So in essence, we can go from 181 officers to 179 and hire 2 more civilians to do things that the police officers don't have to do. And whilst to a degree that's true, the report didn't point out that that would have to be collectively bargained with the police union, because we're not allowed to simply give work that's being done by a member of their bargaining unit to someone who's not within their bargaining unit without collectively negotiating that. And I had asked them to say in the report that while some of those recommendations were valid, it wasn't something that I, as the chief, could just wave a wand and take care of. That would have to be done through collective bargaining. It may take years to do. I'm sure the police union is going to want something in exchange for us getting positions of theirs taken from the department. That's been historically what the case has been. So it's not a simple process, which the report made it out to be. And it was frustrating. Again, it wasn't reflected in the report, the complexity of making some of those changes. And it wasn't a simple process or even a temporary process. There was a comment made by the consultant that since we're short-staffed, why not use some of that money to hire civilians to do what the officers were doing? And again, that's not something we can do because it would have to be collectively bargained. And I don't know where the consultant came from. It's possible he's from a non-union state where they don't have to collectively bargain those issues. And there are many states in the South and other places in the country where management has free reign to do whatever. That's not the case here in the Northeast. So we're limited on what we can do. So that covers those first two bullets. And I don't know if that affected the fire department at all, but I'll let them comment on that.
No, we're in a situation where, again, we carry vacancies from time to time as we have retirements and we have people leave. But generally we have a standing list where we can fill those vacancies rather quickly. And as I've said, we put on, I think by the end of May, we'll have put on about 20 people in the last year. So we did have a point back in 20 and 21 where a lot of those numbers came from, where we were running about 20 vacancies due to retirements, and we were in the process of giving a test and going through those steps. But at this point, we're not carrying the vacancies and we don't really have that manpower issue.
Let's see. And then the next two bullets kind of go hand in hand. The report said that we need to fill our vacancies that we have quicker and find new strategies of recruiting to fill those vacancies and just get it done. And we pointed out to the consultant that that's not easier said than done. Number one, the timeline to fill vacancies for the police department, the background investigation takes time. In order to properly vet a candidate, there's a very comprehensive background, which has gotten even more comprehensive in the last 6 months. It also requires us to use outside vendors for a psychological exam, a polygraph exam, and a medical exam. Oftentimes, getting appointments for those things may take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So, we're at the mercy sometimes of outside vendors. So to just speed up the process, we're trying. We do everything we can to speed it up, but we're at the mercy of outside forces. And then to come up with new strategies to recruit, we've racked our brains. I've spoken to other police departments. I'm a commissioner for the Commission on Accreditation, and at my conferences and hearings, I ask other chiefs what they're doing. We're all facing the same circumstances. And basically what I asked the consultant is, I agree with you, give me some ideas. And the report came back and said, just do it. Well, as the consultant, I was expecting him to give me some suggestions, which I didn't get. So it's not as simple as to say, just fill those vacancies quicker. I'd love to do that. We're trying. And if anyone has any ideas on how we can do better, I'm open to them, but our consultant didn't give me any either. So we're still in the same process and same boat that we were in before we had the study. And again, that doesn't probably affect the fire so much, but it did affect us. And then finally, the last couple things from our perspective, the report noted that school security and the overtime related to COVID for running the COVID clinics, security at the vaccine clinics, et cetera, should not be paid by the police budget, that should be coming from other sources. And we explained to them after the draft that the police budget does not pay for those things. That was done through the ARPA funds, through the COVID, COVID money coming from the federal government and the state. And school security is paid from the school board, the school budget. They hire the school security. They also pointed out, and that wasn't changed in the final draft, that still remains in there. They also made a comment that we should change the way we do our school crossings, that police should not be covering the school crossings. We explained to them that we agree with that, and we've tried to get that changed to have the school system do that. And in years past, we've had no luck getting the school administrators to look at that. Thankfully, in the last year, with the new administration that's there has been kind of an open door to look at that and look at other ways to subcontract that to private vendors or something else, to take that out of the hands of the police department. And therefore, officers would not be forced to cover school crossing posts on a regular basis because there's not enough school crossing guards. They also mentioned that we should hire more. We can't create people to take the job if they don't apply. The pay is not that great. We're trying to get that increased. We haven't been successful with that. But again, they basically made the recommendation to just do it. That's not good enough. We're looking for suggestions and ideas, and we haven't gotten anything new from them. So we're doing the best we can, and we're working with the school system to see if we can come up with a better way to do this, cover the school crossings. And I think Fire covered the collective bargaining issue with minimum staffing. As he said, they're again, the report didn't note that they're limited by the collective bargaining agreement, that they have to have a certain number of firefighters. And unless that gets changed through bargaining, there's not something that management, can do. So the report
Right,
should have been.
And as far as outside overtime work for our department, it's such a minuscule part of our overtime budget. I mean, occasionally we have to hire firefighters to do a standby at a large event, or we have to we have a fire watch where we have to get an inspector there on location for a certain amount of time. But that's a very, very small part of our overtime budget. So that doesn't really pertain to the fire department.
Let's see. I covered the school crossing issue already. As far as the additional staffing to civilianize specific positions, we agreed. And in fact, a couple of the recommendations that are in the draft report or in the final report came from us, came from either me or my staff, to hire a crime analyst and things like that. However, obviously budget constraints over the years, we have not been allowed to increase civilian staffing of the police department. In fact, we have less civilian staff than we had, which I understand the reasons for that, but the report didn't reflect that we in fact have tried to do that. It said that we should do that, but it didn't give the other side of it, that we've requested that. We'd love to have a crime analyst and some other positions in the police department that are civilianized, that are experts in that field, because it would make a huge difference. I covered the crossing guard issue. They made a comment in the report about our dash cam project, that it wasn't properly vetted, and that we didn't do a cost analysis. And I noted to them that wasn't a decision that we made. That was a state mandate that we had to have dash cams installed by a certain date. Therefore, we had to get it done. It was not something that we had a chance to plan out or to make a decision whether or not it was cost effective or not cost effective. It was a state law, and we had to get it done, and the city budgeted the necessary funds for us to do that. And we're in the process of installing dash cams in all our patrol cars as required by state law. So I asked them to include in the report the backup on that was a state mandate, not something that we just on a whim decided to do. And that was not noted in the report either. And the next few things I believe are all fire related. So I'll turn it over to the fire.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, as far as the existing apparatus maintenance and replacement plan, we do have a standing replacement plan for our fire apparatus. They're obviously big ticket items. You know, fire apparatus could range anywhere from 700,000 to $1 million, depending on the type of apparatus that's bought. So we do have them spaced out on a regular replacement plan, and so they're big ticket items. So they're easy items. They're easy targets when the capital budget has to be trimmed. And occasionally that's what we run into. So if an apparatus is scheduled to be replaced in a certain budget year and it gets cut, the need doesn't go away. However, it gets pushed up to the following year. So that's when you start to see these, 2 or 3 apparatus that need to be replaced in a single year. It isn't because we didn't plan for it. It's because they got cut in previous years and then we have to bring them back again. However, currently, we've had good success in explaining to the city the need. The fleet is in need of quite a bit of repair and replacement. So we were able to keep 2 fire engines in next year's capital budget. So again, this is something that we were in discussions with finance over before the Evergreen study ever came out. And I think we're in the process of getting back on track with our replacement program and keeping those apparatus spaced out so they don't keep, coming back in budgets where we have to replace multiple apparatus at one time. As far as the inspectors, we have, in order to get the number of inspections done that we need to do, we have a certain number of full-time inspectors within the department, but we have in the past implemented part-time inspectors to help make up some of the difference and to get some of the, especially the residential inspections done. And we are now in the process of hiring 2 more part-time inspectors as we've had in the past. So I think that's another issue that's been solved there. The fire records management system we already touched upon. That's part of our information technology upgrade. So that's something that's in the works.
Actually, we covered this already regarding the COVID issue in the report. It didn't reflect the COVID overtime that was required. And I already covered the school security that was not corrected in the final report. So we could move to the next if there's another slide. A couple things that were noted, and again, the first thing came, again, a recommendation that we gave them was for a dedicated grants person for the police department. And then it kind of morphed into maybe police fire as a public safety person. We have a lieutenant on a very, very part-time basis that handles our grants. And basically what he does is manage the grants that are state grants or federal grants that we get, which is time consuming in and of itself, the reporting requirements. The city has a part-time grants person, but it would behoove the city to have a dedicated grants person for the police or public safety grants person that could research grants, write grants, and try to get extra funding for the police and fire departments. And that was a suggestion that we brought up that was in the report. Cost savings, opportunity between FD marinas. We're looking at a new marine base that would house both fire and police. That was already something that's been a couple of years in the making. Right now, there's a study for a location for that. There's a site survey that's in the process, that's funded, and that's in progress. So that's something that's been in the capital budget going back 2 or 3 years. And again, we're not arguing with the recommendation, but it wasn't pointed out that that's something that we've had on the table now for 2 years. And well, the additional fire station, obviously that's not me. I'll leave that to the deputy chief to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the additional fire station, we've had several of these studies come through over the last decade or two. And one of our districts that is probably the most underserved given the size of it and the call volume in that district is the district for Station 4, which is out of the Westport Avenue station. There's right now, one engine that runs out of that station. And what we are proposing to do in the future is to take a company out of headquarters where we have multiple companies and move a ladder truck up to Station 4. And the purpose that would serve is then our three busiest stations as far as call volume and response territory, headquarters, Station 2, Broad River Station, and Station 4 would all have an engine and a ladder company responding out of them. So basically it's spreading out the resources that we have now based on the call volume that we have up there. And it would shorten the time into Station 4's district, which is the Cranberry district. It's the district that covers the high school. It's the district that covers Westport Avenue. And we would be relocating that company in order to provide additional service to that district. That would entail renovations to Station 4. It would entail, putting studies together to make sure that that's the best usage of the apparatus and the manpower. And we did mention this when the study was being consulted, but I don't think it made it into the final version. But that's certainly something the fire department is interested in doing. And it's something that's come up in studies in previous years.
And I think especially with this slide, and we mentioned it before, I think because of the consultant's background and experience as a consultant in, again, the public safety and I guess dispatch area, he really was focused on the technology component of fire and police. So as many times as we tried to really broaden out some of the conversation, it always came back to that technology piece. So again, I think with today and just overall, and the chief mentioned it, there were just areas that it would have been great if we could have discussed further and maybe have some of those recommendations make it into the study versus, again, a very heavy technology perspective. Well, so that last slide was just questions. So my computer stopped sharing. So I guess, are there any questions for PD or FD?
I just want to say thank you for putting together that presentation and being so open and transparent with us and providing information with what you've already been doing and are going to be doing in the future. So thank you for that. Councilmember Alterman has a question or comment.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick question. Are you guys using the most current version of NextGen?
Yeah, the updates that come from NextGen, they update the system regularly, but there are major upgrades that are done that we have to pay for. And we have, been keeping up with those major upgrades that cost. And I believe, and I'm not sure if Deputy Chief Zecca or Deputy Chief Walsh are on. I see their names, but they may know if we're actually up to the actual current version. I know that we've upgraded dramatically over the years, but I don't want to give you false information of whether or not we are actually at the top level right now, because I know that there's costs involved for that.
Unfortunately, I can't answer for sure until we're meeting with them in the next couple of weeks to try to evaluate the whole system and where we could improve on how we use it. So
what we found overall with the system is we know that there's a lot more that it can do for us, but it requires some programming, which we don't have anyone currently in the department that has those skills. Unfortunately, former Deputy Chief Wren, who now works for NextGen, years back as a lieutenant, he was our IT person in the police department. When NextGen came aboard, he was the point person, was trained, and he wrote most of the background coding, so to speak, for the reports that are in our system now. When he retired and went to NextGen, there was no one that had his level of expertise to be able to do what he was doing. And we have not been able to get someone trained to do that because it's not a simple process. So what we've done now is we've reached back out to NextGen. We're meeting with them, as the Deputy Chief said, in the next week and a half or so. And actually with Dave Rinn and other members of the Next Gen team to see what it would take to either have somebody from there paid on a part-time basis or something to upgrade all those modules where the reporting, it's basically in the reporting aspect to get us more data to be able to make better decisions. Or if it's possible to have somebody train an individual or two, and how involved would that be for someone on our staff that has some expertise to be able to make those coding changes to write reports and create reports that would better reflect what we're looking for. So that's been our biggest hurdle with NextGen, not so much the system itself, but extracting the data for reporting and, evidence-based policing and making decisions based upon analytics and crime analysis and things like that. But we're working on trying to figure out a way to improve that.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you both so much for answering. Thank you, Chairperson McMurray.
Oh, anytime. Thanks so much, Chief. That was actually going to be one of my questions, and I think you answered it. I'm glad to hear you guys are exploring what options there are available, whether it's in-house or through NextGen, to get you those upgrades that are needed. Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Chair McMurray, and thank you all so much. This presentation is fabulous on so many levels, but for me, it really provides really great context for the efficiency study. When I'm reading through the section on public safety, I totally see the kind of the disproportionate, but I'll say like focus on technology makes sense to me now. So what I will say too, I just have a couple of questions because I know that you're in process doing some of the things that, as you just described in this, and I see a couple things come out and I just want to know your opinion on it. Like they recommend using crime investigation checklists. Like, is that a best practice? What's your thought on that kind of recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, is it a best practice? Not that I'm aware of, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't know of anyone that does use that. We do use, not that we don't use checklists. There are some situations where there are checklists that are used as a guide, but in general, for the average investigation, so to speak, a checklist is not used. And I think basically it varies because there are so many variables in every incident and every investigation that you encounter.
Okay. Would you agree that the patrol, oh, sorry, Chief, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I think I might be answering your next question.
Okay, go for it.
There was a comment made in the report related to that the detective shouldn't be redoing and re-interviewing people that patrol had already done. And I found that, I'll be honest with you, I found that confusing. I was a detective for many years, and it's a normal practice for a detective to re-interview people, sometimes 2, 3, or more times. You always gather more information and more in-depth information when you re-interview people. They may remember something they didn't tell the patrol officer that night. The next day they recall something. They may have heard something from a neighbor that they weren't aware of when the patrol officer was there the day before. So when I read that, I kind of, I'll be honest with you, I kind of giggled that I don't know where that came from, because I've never heard anyone ever say that a detective should not re-interview people and that the patrol officer should be the one that did that and they should be doing other things. That kind of goes against anything I've ever learned, but I don't know. I can't really speak to that other than to say I was a little surprised to read that.
Would you say that, like, just as a follow-up, that they say the quality of patrol incident reports could be improved? I mean, everybody wants continuous improvement, so I assume that isn't necessarily something to.
Oh yeah, no, that
Yeah.
I don't argue with that point.
Right.
We're always looking to get reports improved, and arrest warrants and search warrants. And I would say that the biggest struggle in speaking to the court, the prosecutors, and even when I spoke to someone I know in Bridgeport, which is not our court, but it's a prosecutor there that I just happen to know. And he mentioned to me that one of the biggest hurdles they face is also some of the quality reports that they struggle with. So I don't argue with that, but we also, when we see that, we do have officers that go back to report writing training we have a sergeant who does some in-house training on report writing when we see issues with certain officers on the quality of report. So that's always a struggle. It's something we're still working on, and we do constantly.
I could just interject for 1 minute on that. The consultant was very, as we said, very heavy on technology, very heavy on data. And we definitely had a disagreement on how the reports could be improved. He felt that it should all be data and very little narrative, and which is very different from our practice. So I don't know. We definitely had a difference of opinion on how certain things should be done.
Sorry. Thank you both so much for that information. Chair, I do have 2 more questions, but I want to.
Please, go ahead. I was going to piggyback on one thing Deputy Chief Zecca said, if you don't mind, just really quick, 'cause it relates to what you just asked and what she said. So the data and how that is a different practice than what you currently do in our department, I'm assuming that's across many departments, across other municipalities too, correct?
And that's not to say our data can't be improved. Obviously, the better data we put in, the better we can then use to analyze. He seemed to want to be completely away from a narrative in any report, which that's what I was disputing.
And I don't know much about police work because I have never been a police officer. And I think we can all agree I should not be a police officer after taking part in the simulator at the police department. However, I would guess that narrative is a huge part of those reports on a case-by-case basis. Go ahead, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I missed the simulator, and I'm sorry for that. So I got to come again to do that. I'll tell you. So my question, I guess, in order is, so I see the charts here in the efficiency study about, officers per 1,000 population ratio for police and fire. And according to these, and I don't know if this is statistically significant, obviously, but according to the data that we see here, it looks like Norwalk PD is at or above, right? The average, and based on everything we've learned about our staffing situation, especially with SROs and all that, that seems to contradict that. So I don't know if you have any kind of, if I'm reading it right based on the report, what?
Yeah, no, I'd love to answer that because that was
Okay.
another point that I made with the consultant when I read the draft. There is a statistic that the FBI publishes that has officers per 1,000, and they compare across the country. But the problem with that statistic, and I went to a week-long workload assessment staffing school to be able to do staffing studies. And that was done through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And they made a major comment to point that out, that statistic is flawed in the sense that it doesn't take into account what your community expects of the police department, number one, and the work that the police department is doing. As an example, the Stanford Police Department is not a first responder, so they don't respond to medical calls. Norwalk Police, we are a first responder, so we respond to every medical call, regardless of whether it's a sprained ankle or a heart attack. So our call volume alone, forget about the size of the city, we're responding to a lot more incidents because they don't respond to any medical calls. Number two, you have to look at whether a department or a community wants certain level of service. Do they want officers to have free time to be able to do community policing, to be able to visit schools, to be able to do have school resource officers, to have a traffic unit, there's so many variables that a police department has based upon their local community and what the expectations of the community are. I won't mention the police department, it's not in Connecticut, but when I was in a school in Massachusetts several years ago for leadership school, we met a chief from another large metropolitan police department. And because of his staffing, they basically had no free time. And they only staffed the police department to respond to emergency calls. They did not respond to any calls that weren't in progress because of their budget resources. So their number per 1,000 was much lower But the community was satisfied with that because they didn't want to fund the difference. We could have fewer officers if we did not respond to minor calls. We didn't respond to traffic complaints. We didn't respond to medical calls. We didn't do community policing. We didn't have a traffic unit. We didn't have SROs. I mean, there's so many variables that you can't just look at number of officers per thousand and compare. It's not apples to apples. It's just a number that's thrown out there. It's something to look at. But again, I asked him in the report to point out that that is just a statistic that's put out there. It's an easy number to calculate, but it doesn't tell the real picture of each individual community. And again, there was no caveat in the report that pointed that out. It was simply a chart. And I even asked him in our meeting what the point was. And he said, well, I'm just putting it out there. And I said, well, what does it tell anybody? And he says, it just tells people what the FBI numbers are. Well, okay, but it's just going to raise questions from the community because they're saying the same question. What does it mean? You didn't tell anybody what it meant and how it has a bearing. So that was one of my complaints with a lot of the report was it threw information out there and just left it and didn't give a background story to what meaning it has or if it has a meaning. So yeah, that's a long answer to a short question. Sorry about that. But,
No, don't apologize. I'm usually the long question person. So I appreciate that.
If I could interject quickly too.
Yes, please do.
Just because the fire department finds itself in a similar situation. And I came on the department in 1994. And since then, we have the same number of fire engines, the same number of ladder companies, essentially the same staffing as we did back then. But back then we were doing about 3,000 calls a year. This year we're on track to do about 8,000 calls with the same staffing and the same number of companies. Obviously, since then we've taken on emergency medical response and a bunch of other duties. And then you work in public education, you work in pre-planning, you work in everything else, training that the firefighters do. So we're stretched further than we have been, at any point in the past. And we actually still have one company that's understaffed, where we have the rescue truck in town. The rescue company is the only rescue we have in town. We have 5 engines, we have 2 ladder trucks, we only have 1 rescue. And they respond to every car accident, they respond to the highway, they respond to hazardous materials calls, they respond to gas leaks, any kind of specialty skill that's needed, that company responds to. And at this point, it's not fully staffed. We have an officer and 2 firefighters on there, as opposed to an officer and 3 firefighters that we have on every other company in the city. And that's, again, something that we brought to the consultant and said, in reality, we need to fill this company out. They need the extra staffing on there. And the consultant agreed, but it never really made the report, and that's something that would have helped us, in what we're trying to do. And it would have helped for the community to understand that a little better too from the report.
Thank you so much, Chief McCabe, Chief Kolwick. I appreciate that info. I mean, and Chief Zeika too, because I see that, Chief McCabe, in the table they did, and they cited their own data where you are very understaffed according to that table, but the narrative's not really there, I think, in the way that, as you're describing, would be more helpful. So, I mean, the new firefighters, congratulations to them. That's amazing. I see we got 12 new, but I see that that's probably an outstanding problem still, regardless, right?
Absolutely. And it's,
Okay.
with the increased calls, there's, you have companies that'll respond to a call and then they'll be tied up, and a second call will come in their district, which pulls a company out of the neighboring district. And, it can be like a game of dominoes some days, where we're crisscrossing the city to answer all of these emergency calls. And it stretches our resources very thin.
Thank you.
Are you all finished, Councilmember Johnson? I just want to make sure.
I have one more question, but I'm going to hold that question because I have just a feeling one of my colleagues may mention this. We'll see.
No problem at all.
Thank you.
Councilmember Revolus.
I probably won't, but I just had a question, but I'm kind of glad you guys said some things. Councilperson Johnson, you actually ended with one of my questions, because it would overview that, that would still be a look of needing people. But I actually was hoping you would kind of talk about your dispatch and how you feel about it. Because that was part of their recommendation. And I was kind of trying to figure out this centralized thing. And one of the topics that I heard, two of the topics that I picked up that I thought I was hearing incorrectly to myself, but I'm glad you guys said it, was the overbearing use of technology and the fact that it's kind of removing the human personalities that deal with, like, for example, if I always thought that if you repeatedly interview somebody, that was for consistency too. Like, you want to see consistency in a story. And then the narrative, again, like I kind of got that pulled off. So I'm glad you said it. I just wanted to hear how you guys felt about your dispatch and how do you feel about a centralized dispatch? Does it remove the same type of who you're using for Norwalk? Like, how do you feel?
Well, I'm not 100% sure of the question, but
like
central-
where it said, I'm sorry, recommendation 6.6-8, establishing a governance structure for a combined dispatch center.
oh, okay.
So how do you
what-
feel about your current dispatch right now?
Well, right now, the way the dispatch, we do have a combined dispatch
That's
center,
okay.
which is within the police department, and it's supervised by a police lieutenant, which dispatches police, fire, and EMS, and takes all 911 calls and then dispatches them. So it is a centralized dispatch, but it is not removed. It's part of our structure, and it's part of our day-to-day work, and they're embedded within the police department and embedded within the community, within the city. What the report was looking at was, it felt that we needed another level of governance where police, fire, and EMS had representatives on some type of board that would be above, I guess, above the police lieutenant, above me, above the fire chief. And I'm not quite sure what it would do, because right now, the police, the combined dispatch falls under the police, but we're constantly in contact with the fire chief and fire command staff. We're constantly in contact with Norwalk Hospital EMS. So all of us have input. All of us have day-to-day input on oversight of the center, even though it's run by a police lieutenant. So in our opinion, and again, I'm not saying I'm always right, but in our opinion, in my dispatch lieutenant's opinion, adding another layer of formal governance wouldn't really do anything except just complicate issues. Because we do have really good oversight and a good rapport with the fire department and the police department and the Norwalk Hospital EMS. And we deal with all of them on a day-to-day basis. And if there's any issues that come up, they're always a phone call away, and we deal with it. I don't want to speak for Deputy Chief McCabe if he has another thought on that, because we hadn't really discussed that with the fire or EMS. This is our take on it. So if they
Right.
disagree,
Yeah.
I'm open to.
No, I
hear
don't.
it. I'm not trying to.
I don't disagree. Yeah, dispatching police and dispatching fire can be very different animals. The dispatcher that's dealing with a fire or a fire type emergency is very involved in the call, as far as calling mutual aid, notifying the power company. Very, very critical. They have a very critical role in the scene, in addition to the incident commander, who would be out in the field. And so anytime that we've had bumps in the road, it's generally it's more of a training issue. It's a communication issue, but we have a great relationship with Lieutenant Blake, who supervises the combined dispatch. We're in communication with him several times a week, and with Stacy, who's another supervisor down there. So I think that works out well. We don't have a fire supervisor in the center, in the building. But even if that position were to be created, I don't have anybody to send down there that I can take off out of a station or off the street and put down there. So I don't even know that that's really a realistic recommendation, if that's what they're recommending. I think right now, we have such good communication with PD when it comes to dispatching, that I don't see that there's an issue that would need to be addressed beyond the ones that we address on a weekly basis.
And just to give you just a real brief history of how things evolved. When we were in our old building on West Avenue back, many years ago, we used to have separate police dispatching and fire dispatch.
Right.
So a 911 call would come in, if it was a fire call, it would be sent to the fire department. They would take care of it. If it was anything else, it would stay in the police. When we moved to the new building, dispatch became a combined center, and the fire dispatchers came over and the police, and they all combined, and a civilian was hired to be the combined dispatch director and emergency management director for the city. They found that that really didn't work. So when that individual resigned to another position, he left to go to somewhere else in the country. They negotiated with the various unions involved, and they split it apart, and they created a combined dispatch director, which they designated as a police lieutenant, and they created an assistant emergency management director and put emergency management under the fire department. And that's now how Michelle currently is the assistant emergency management director, working under the auspices of the fire department. And Lieutenant Blake is the combined dispatch director as a police officer, overseeing the dispatch section and dispatching. But as Chief McCabe said, the coordination and the cooperation and the oversight, in our opinion, it's there. We all, thankfully, and I will say that in our community, police and fire and EMS all get along very well, which is not the case in some communities. And one issue that wasn't raised, and maybe Michelle doesn't want to blow her own horn, so to speak, but over the years, if you go back many years, there was no one talked about emergency management. It didn't exist. There was no focus on it. It was just things happened. And when a disaster happened, or a tornado or a hurricane or a snowstorm, people just did what they always did and hope for the best. Years back, former Chief McCarthy redirected more of a focus towards emergency management, along with other members in the fire department, and said, we got to do better. We got to create a more formalized approach. And that's how emergency management kind of became a focus. And then over the years, Michelle was brought on and now focuses on it full time. But it also takes time away from police and fire, as well as obviously Michelle on a full-time basis. So that's another role that we've all taken on, and emergency management is no longer a sidebar. It's a major focus for police, fire, and EMS, and we all work together in that regard on action plans for every major event in the city. So we all have the relationship is not just in dispatching. It's a relationship that goes in everything that we do every day. We're meeting about topics all the time and work together to develop these plans along with the school system. So we're fortunate that we developed a really good system of public safety, I think, in the city.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I appreciate that answer. It was a place where I kind of poked my ear up a little bit, because for me, actually, and I could bash something, but I can agree with that. But for me, what I kept visualizing is the fact that in emergencies, we see all three. So how is it not connected already? You know what I mean? That's why I just wanted to hear from you guys, your implementation on this, because there was a time that wasn't always that. So I thought this was something that was already in unison. What you just said, it kind of is. So thank you, because it was one of the ones I was really confused about.
And Councilmember Revolus, to add to that, just to dovetail off of what the chief said, I was actually able to sit with the dispatch center on Tuesday this week, and it was really informative. And the only thing that they brought up as problematic potentially, and I don't even know if that might be too strong of a word, was the issues with next gen, which the chief had already sort of gone over. So it seems like it's a really seamless, impressive operation. And I sat with them for a while, and I was obviously very impressed by what they do. And again, that is not a job that I should be put in ever. But I think that it's a really good program that's in place right now, to go off of what you said.
Thank you, because again, that's why I was a bit confused. I'm like, like, I thought we got that one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
That was not my question, Councilmember Booth. That was awesome. I wanted to know that information. Thank you so much for asking it. Just first, a real quick comment, being somebody who works with a lot of data in my day job, I just for the record want to state that when I found out that they kind of, at least from the appearances in the efficiency study, grouped like data about particularly overtime pre and during COVID, it frustrated me because I felt like I'd want to know some kind of comparison, right? Because COVID's such an anomaly. So I'll just leave that. But my question then is, and other than the SRO rather, discussion in the efficiency study, I don't see a lot of discussion about community policing in general. And I just wonder what you all felt, you know, like if there's anything in here that you think could be helpful in moving our community policing forward in a positive direction continually.
Yeah. Well, actually, to be honest, I don't recall the consultant interviewing anyone from community policing or even talking to me about it. I can't speak to the other two deputies, but he had a very specific focus on what he was asking questions about and what he was looking for information on. And even in things that we kind of directed him to do or to look at. And I think the fire department, you know, saw the same thing, that I don't even think that he even had anything in the report about emergency management even in there, or Michelle, or I don't think he interviewed the fire inspectors at all. There was a lot of areas that he was supposed to come and interview people, and then he got COVID and then never came to the police department in person. He did some things over the phone, and I'm not blaming him for that. He got COVID, he couldn't travel, but I did feel that there could have been a more in-depth look into various agents, various units within the police department. We have a very complex organization when it comes to the crime scene unit, evidence, when it comes to the records, when it comes to, you know, a special victims unit, the detective division, community policing. I mean, there's a lot there, and very little of that was addressed or even touched on in the report. It was really focused on certain aspects. And again, I'm not going to speak for them, but I got the impression that a lot of this was something that they have a template and they were going to fill that template with those areas that they're comfortable with. And that's what they were focusing on. At least that was my take. And again,
Okay.
I might not be right, but that's when I read our section, that's the feeling that I got, that it was going to go in a certain direction regardless.
Okay, thanks for that, Chief, because I do see the org chart, obviously, but then to your point, there's certainly not equal time, but there's just some things that just really aren't addressed. So I just wanted to know your take on it. So thank you.
I have a multi-pronged question, so bear with me. So obviously, I understand that you cannot right now, nor would you, because of collective bargaining, take civilian position or take police positions and move them to civilian positions. I understand that. And also with recruitment being down, I can't see that happening right now anyway. So you did mention, though, potentially having a couple of civilian positions. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, just so we can talk about it in the future, and funding that, what civilian positions you need, and if there's an approximate cost associated with that and what their roles would be. And does that also play into the potential of having a shared public safety grant person, or would that be more of an officer or a lieutenant?
No, I think that if there was three, I mean, there's a lot of different ideas I could come up with, but off the top of my head and things that I've talked about, the grants position, obviously, which we discussed earlier, the crime analyst position, which we discussed earlier, a dedicated crime analyst, that's a trained person that's what they do. And then the third position would be more of a IT, not a nuts and bolts person, but a information management type person that could do the coding to do the Power BI behind the scenes to create the reports that we're looking at. You know, we're aware that there's a lot that our system can do if we had someone trained in Power BI to the level, and we've actually been having meetings with a person on this issue of Power BI, and they showed us what some other agencies are doing, creating dashboards that automatically generate these reports and data that on a daily basis. And we said, that's great, and we agree with you, but how do you get there? We don't have anyone that can do that. You know, I realize that it's great to have, and we'd love to have it, but I don't have the skills or the time to do it, nor does anyone else in our department. So that's what we're looking at now. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 10 with the same person to see how can we get there? How can we get either a part-time or an officer trained to some level, or find somebody that has a little bit of time that maybe can get that has some skills. But that's something we're looking at, because that's something that we definitely could use to create better reporting, even to the point of creating what they're working to improve, like the mayor's dashboard, which they're working now to improve, and then repost in a better format that can really do more. But again, that requires somebody skilled in Power BI that can take all this data that's behind the scenes and automatically pull it and display it in a manner that the public or whomever, management or whatever, can then view and get something out of and make decisions or do something with. So that would be huge. Those three things would be something that we definitely would like to see. But again, I mean, that costs money, and if everybody got what they wanted in the city, the budget would probably be twice as what it is. So,
Right.
there has to be decisions made, and, and those decisions are difficult at times. So,
But I think it's good to have these conversations now as we think ahead to the future and the next operating budget. And I mean, this is the group that would advocate for you for those things. So I'm
Absolutely.
glad to know.
And I'll second everything that the chief just said. We've had those conversations, myself and Chief Gatto and Chief Conti, and Michelle, and right now we're in a situation where our software, our reports, they generate a tremendous amount of data and information, but we don't have anyone dedicated to go through and to run those reports and to make use of all that data that's collected. If we have a specific need, we can go to it, we can generate a report, and we can look and see, if what we need in a particular instance. But there's so much more out there than we can really handle on a daily basis. And someone to make sense of all of that data that's collected would be fantastic. And help with grants is always welcome. Grants they take a long time to write. It's a very laborious process. Researching them and finding the ones that are out there takes a very long time. And sometimes it's just not having a person to sit down and spend the time doing that. So I would back up everything the chief said as far as those needs are there, and sometimes we just don't have the people or the time to make use of the information that's out there.
And just to give you an example of a really obvious example, if you watch on Zoom now the police commission meetings, the deputy chiefs, and especially Deputy Chief Walsh, doing the stats on traffic stats and car stops and that kind of stuff. All that is drawn manually. He has to go through and manually pull. That data is all there, but we don't know how to write a report that would automatically just present that. So that takes time just to go through manually. Our shift commanders on a monthly basis report on the activity of the officers under their command. That's all done manually. They sit down and they run each officer individually. They count up car stops and self-initiated activity and how many arrests they made, and that all that data is there. It's easy to pull if we had someone that knew how to run a report that would just drag all that information and put it into a barrel and present it even to the public or whomever.
Right.
So again, that's just an example of what we're talking about, and we're hoping to get there in some manner and do better at it, but it's not an easy process without having people that are dedicated, that know what they're doing and are trained to do it.
I think it sounds really valuable if we can get there for sure. Going back to Chief McCabe, what you had said about the Marine unit, is there funding in place for this? Because I know you've been thinking about this or talking about this for a while. Is it something that we do have funding for, or we're looking to fund in the future?
Well, we have an active Marine unit, and we've had it for some time. We do have a new boat that was mostly funded by a grant that's in the process of being put together now. It was a boat that the Coast Guard had that they've retired and became available on the market, and they make these things available to, you know, police departments and fire departments who need them. So it's in very good condition. I think the PD is getting a very similar unit. So we're, you know, otherwise the Marine unit is just part of our operations budget. It's something that's budgeted for every year. And we have firefighters who we train to get their captain's license, and we give them training out on the water to run that unit. But it's an engine company. It's Engine 3 out of East Norwalk, so they double as our Marine unit. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I think you were talking about a joint Marine unit between the fire department and the police department. Is that something that is going to be different than what we currently have? And is there
Well,
funding for that?
what I was mentioning was the Marine base.
Okay.
The location.
The building, right? Yeah.
The building. So
Yep.
right now, the fire department does not have a marine base. They operate
Right.
out of their engine company. When they have a call, they drive the fire truck to Vets Park and take their boat out. We have a Marine unit, a base that's by Sono Seafood, which is a rented spot that they've been for many years. But there's a lot of issues with that. The building is not in the greatest shape. It floods, and there's a lot of issues there. There is money budgeted in the capital budget. Well, there's money budgeted for a site survey, and then there's also money budgeted later on in the future in the capital budget to develop a new Marine unit, new Marine base for the police department that would also have space for the fire department, possibly be part of the welcome center that the Parks and Rec wants to rebuild at Vets Park. That's all kind of in the planning stages right now. But the idea was thrown out there that if the Parks and Rec built their new welcome center, part of that would be a Marine unit, Marine base for the police, and storage and area for the fire department. You know, all in one encompassed location on city property. So there's no rent, there's no leasing, there's, you know, it would be up to date. It wouldn't flood, you know, it would be ready to go. And that's all in the works, but like anything like that, it takes time. You know, it took time to get the money appropriated, and now it's taking time to get contracts with a site survey. And I know Deputy Chief Zeck has been working on the site survey with City Hall, and she still has hair, but I don't know how, because it's way past what she thought it was going to have been done already at this point. But she's still pushing ahead to get that accomplished.
We are working with Parks and Rec to hopefully getting consultants soon to be able to do that study. Hopefully.
That's great. I would love to see that happen for you all. I just have one more thing that I would love for Chief Kowalik to highlight. And then if anybody else has any final questions, we will of course tackle those. But Chief Kowalik, I know you and I and the other chiefs have talked about recruitment. And I know that the consultant did not give you any ideas, but I was hoping you could highlight what you guys have all been enduring in terms of recruitment and what ideas you are utilizing currently, so everybody knows how hard you are working on this.
Yeah, so I mean, basically we do the traditional methods right now. So we obviously attend job fairs. We attend various college and university job fairs, and not just in Connecticut, but we go into New York to colleges that are criminal justice related. In addition to that, we do a lot. Thankfully, I have some officers that really have taken to social media for our department. So they do a lot on social media. We've taken some advertising in the New York papers for some small ads, hoping to recruit possibly some people either from New York or New York NYPD officers that want to come to Connecticut. And we do have a couple we've interviewed. We have one, I believe, that may be coming over. We had another that was going to come and decided to stay at NYPD. But we also are looking to see what else we can do. When I was at my recent conference, a couple agencies there had mentioned that they hired actual marketing companies to do actual marketing campaigns for their organizations, including dedicated websites, print advertising, social media, really targeting that 21 to 30-year-old age group. their thought was that police departments have done recruiting like they've always have, which has always focused on what we looked at years ago. And that's not the case anymore. You know, the people that are in their 20s now are a lot different than they were, 20 years ago. So they're dedicating their advertising, their social media, their ad campaigns, even the colors and things that they're using in the ads for that 21 to 30 age group. We met with a company the other day, the deputy chiefs and I, on Zoom. They gave us a presentation, and they have had great success in other agencies, not in Connecticut, but in around the country, increasing their recruitment dramatically through their advertising. But the cost was a lot higher than what I had gone in thinking. I thought on the high end, a full campaign with dedicated websites, with all the bells and whistles, you might be looking at $30,000 to $50,000, and they were talking about $100,000. So that's not a small amount of money, but there are agencies that are spending that around the country to recruit because of the problems that they're facing. So we're looking at, any other new ideas as well to try to broaden. What we've also done is we've changed our entire process of how we hire. So we used to do our own testing in-house. We'd test once every 2 years, but we found that by the time we got to some people on our test that took it and we interviewed them, they've already gone to other agencies because it was a year and a half later. Or people that wanted to come to Norwalk, there was no test available. And by the time they said, well, you just gave a test, I missed it, I'm not going to wait 2 years. So they take the test and go somewhere else. We're now testing almost every month to 2 months using the Connecticut Police Chief's test, where they can go somewhere else in the state. They check off Norwalk, and then we're notified that they've applied to us. We're also actively recruiting laterals, officers from other Connecticut agencies. I don't want to get specific because it's not ironed out yet, but we've been in talks with the mayor about some incentives for Connecticut officers that come over to us. But again, that's right now, I don't want to get specific because I don't want to throw something out there that's not etched in stone yet, because there's still some issues that we're dealing with. So we're doing that. We're also looking actively at comparative officers, which is officers from other states, certified officers from other states. We're actually in the process of hiring 3 of those, Virginia, military police, and somewhere else. I can't remember. New York. NYPD. So we have 3 officers from there. And those we can train much quicker. We hire a consultant that comes in. They don't have to go to the police academy. They just get Connecticut specific training. And our lateral officers, we have 4 right now that are almost ready to be hired. And they take very little training, just our local training and some local field training. So we can get them on the street quick. So we're doing everything we can to get bodies out there, but qualified people that we want here, not just bodies that take up a uniform, because that's, in the long run, you're going to pay a price if you don't get the right people. So I'd rather be a little short and hire the right people than be full with the wrong people.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Councilmember Revolus.
Thank you. Just to double back on that recruitment, and forgive me, I completely understand. I get what you're saying. You need 21 to 33 now. You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Just making sure. And I get that. We need that. But we're hitting such a pivotal normal in Connecticut, in Norwalk in particularly, of hiring people that don't live here and creating a space. And I know you do it. I plugged you with this before, but I think even with the idea of not being at bus stops or whatever but the growing of recruitment from within the town of Norwalk, focusing more on ways to jive it up for a younger audience, understanding you need that audience, you need the older ones who take the belt, who take the badge now. Get it. I completely get that. We need that now. But it's the home growing that I'm just wondering, we're missing the ball on that, because the greatest people could be the people who have grown up in Norwalk, and the people who we identify with because we know them. A lot of the wrong people sometimes is because they police here but live there. Like the criminals are here and home and civilians are there. So I'm just wondering, and I know you guys do have things in the school systems, you do have programs like that. You already know, we even share a child that we work together on, so I know you're there. I'm just trying to see where, and unfortunately, they didn't even talk to your community staff and chiefs. So I'm just wondering where are we doing in recruitment of home growing officers from Norwalk to Norwalk?
Yeah, so in a couple areas. One area is with our public safety cadets, which are 14 to 20-year-olds. Our PAL sponsors that program. And actually, we just hired one of our newest recruits that just went to the academy, probationary officer Herrera, was a public safety cadet many years ago, who's now, obviously old enough. He's no longer 14 to 20. He's now 23. But he just went to the police academy 2 weeks ago, I guess, in that group of 5. So he was one of our success stories from our public safety cadets that started out when they were 15 years old here. So we're still operating that program and really pushing that. We also have tried to work with our local churches and the NAACP here in Norwalk to try to have them reach out or have us go through them to reach out to their contacts, the congregations, the people they know. I had a meeting actually last week with not Positive Directions. I'm trying to think of I can't think of the name right now. It's not the Substance Abuse Prevention Task Force, but something related to that, where they have members of high school outreach from Brian McMahon and Norwalk High. And I met with the students from those schools to try to talk to them about forming a youth advisory committee that would advise the police department on issues, but coming from their point of view, from the middle school and high school take on what's going on, whether it's on recruitment or whether it's on social issues or the George Floyd situation or whatever, getting their input on, are we doing a good job, a bad job? What can we do different? How is it impacting the way they're looking at us and that kind of thing? So I'm hoping to get that off the ground, where that would be another conduit to get the word out to, those people that are, growing up here and may want to then end up, taking our test. And, but I ran into someone, I'm not going to mention again, the department. I was at a community event a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, and there was an officer from another department who lives here in Norwalk who was asking about the department. And I said, I'm not going to try to pull you away because I don't want to do that to another chief, but should you, be interested, or should you be looking at another department, make sure Norwalk is on the top of your list since you live here. So, we're always speaking to people with that in mind. So, again, I'm always open to other suggestions on how we can do that. But I know through the SROs and the outreach they do, through the mentoring program, that I'm involved in, and several other officers are involved in.
Nice.
I know that the person that I mentor really doesn't have an interest to be a police officer.
Yeah, no. I work with him.
But that's all right, Yeah. And so anyway, I see your point, and we're trying. And we're always looking for other ways to do it.
And I appreciate.
We have a similar approach, to our recruiting. This last test that we gave about a year ago, we, like the chief, we did a lot of recruitment over social media, which was very successful. But we also went out to the high schools. We went out to the community leaders. We went to NCC and tried to get the word out in Norwalk to encourage Norwalk residents to get on board and to put an application in and take the test. It's a very long process. We had 1,228 people apply, for our test. So by the time you get through the written exam and you get through the oral exam and you get through the interview process, the odds the odds that you're going to get a lot of Norwalk people at the very top, you know, are what they are. So as much as we try to get them in, and we encourage getting Norwalk residents on board in the fire department, and we enjoy when we can get them. Sometimes the sheer numbers make it difficult. Although we're also involved with the cadets, and they're a great group, and that's a really great organization. I'm happy to say this group that we have in the academy right now, who will be graduating around Memorial Day. We have a young man who's from Norwalk and a Norwalk High graduate, and just a terrific candidate, and we're going to be excited to get him on the job. He did great on the test. He got through all the processes, and he's going to be coming on board probably first week of June on the line. So it'll be good to get him on.
Oh,
I
wow,
just gotta
that's
add
great.
one more.
Mhm.
I just want to add one more point. I just got a text message from Deputy Chief Zecca reminding me that we also give extra points for Norwalk residents on our entry-level test.
So okay, Officer Zecca, I was just going to ask that. Do we incentivize in any way for our residents on both the fire and the police? So, okay, thank you for reading my mind. I think I froze. I think I
You
froze.
did.
a
Are
little
you,
bit.
you're back.
Sorry.
No,
I
you're
was just
fine.
going to say, thank you for reading my mind. And I appreciate that. You know, I would just say you are doing a great job. I'm great to hear the success stories that we have. And I think our most influential, even if they're very like munchkin bits, but you know, the biggest eyes towards you are actually in elementary school. You know what I mean? Like they love the fire department. They love the police department. So I would just say that's probably the only space that may have been missing. But I remember you guys, you know, when we were in elementary doing the young astronaut and feeding the police department, you know, I think that's when they're the widest eyes for the police and the fire department too. So that would be the only part that I didn't hear, to maybe just dropping those seeds, but hooray on the success stories and just really trying to show we're implementing within. That's all. Thank you.
And it would also add that now we're kind of moving past COVID a little bit more. So again, hopefully a lot of the visits that, you know, the fire trucks were able to do in the past, again, we'll be able to do our annual open house this year, after I think 2 or 3 years of an absence due to COVID. So again, as we're kind of finding the post-COVID routine again, I think we'll also again focus a little bit more on that, the education, the outreach, the smoke trailer, all those things that really again just had to be put on hold due to not wanting little ones that again weren't vaccinated, really wanting to be mindful of their health and safety. So again, we are excited, especially about the open house and some of the other activities for the summer and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
I just wanted to point out that it's really not fair, because when I go into the schools, especially elementary, and you read, and the fire department comes to read, the kids always gravitate to the fire truck, not to the police truck. So
An unfair advantage.
That's true. Okay, that's true. That's true. The big truck is like, okay.
And they always like the fire helmet better than my police hat. So.
I know.
Good
Sorry,
point.
guys.
I was going to add too, because I'm very involved at the elementary school level, at my own school for my kids, and they've just started letting people back into the schools for assemblies and enrichment programs and things. So now's a really good time to get those back in there, because I agree with Diana. Their eyes are wide open and they just look up to you so much. So that's great. Does anybody else have any other questions they want to ask or any other comments? This has been really great discussion. We really appreciate your time and all of your effort now and every day, but thank you for taking us through the efficiency study and shining some light on some of those areas that may have been up for question. Do I have an emotion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Be
you.
well.